The office was nearly empty, the fluorescent lights humming softly in the silence of the 23rd floor. Most of Blackwood Industries had already fled for the holidays, eager to escape the corporate towers of Manhattan for family gatherings and warm fireplaces. Emma Chun sat at her desk outside the corner office, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she finished the quarterly report that absolutely had to be done before Christmas Eve. She didn't mind working late. In fact, she preferred it. The quiet gave her space to think, to work without interruption, and most importantly, to avoid the pitying glances from her colleagues who knew she had nowhere to be for Christmas. No family waiting, no significant other, no holiday plans beyond her small studio apartment, and perhaps a classic movie marathon with takeout Chinese food. The sound of a door opening made her look up. Alexander Blackwood emerged from his office, his tall frame silhouetted against the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the glittering city. Even at 7 in the evening, his charcoal suit was immaculate, his dark hair perfectly styled, his expression as cold and unreadable as always. He was beautiful in the way that marble statues were beautiful, perfect, untouchable, and completely devoid of warmth. He stopped at her desk, and Emma felt her spine straighten instinctively. In the 18 months she'd worked as his executive assistant, she'd learned to anticipate his needs, to move through her duties with precision and efficiency, and to never, ever expect kindness. Alexander Blackwood was brilliant, demanding, and utterly ruthless in business. He'd built his empire from the ground up after his father had nearly destroyed it, and he ruled his company with an iron fist wrapped in expensive Italian leather. "The Henderson contract?" he asked, his voice clipped and professional. "On your desk? Signed and scanned to legal," Emma replied, meeting his steel-gray eyes briefly before returning her attention to her computer screen. "I also rescheduled your meeting with the Tokyo investors to the second week of January and confirmed your flight to the Caymans for the 26th. Something flickered across his face, too quick for her to read. He was silent for a moment, and Emma could feel his gaze on her, assessing and cool. She kept typing, determined not to show how his presence always seemed to fill the entire room, making the air feel thinner and her heart beat faster. "Do you have plans for Christmas?" The question was so unexpected that Emma's fingers froze on the keyboard. She looked up at him, searching his face for some clue as to why he was asking. His expression remained neutral, but there was something in his eyes she couldn't quite identify. No, not really," she admitted, hating how small her voice sounded. She cleared her throat and added with more confidence, "I'm planning a quiet holiday at home." "Alone?" The word hung between them, and Emma felt a flush creep up her neck. "Yes." Alexander's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He slid his hands into his pockets, a gesture she'd learned meant he was thinking, calculating. "I'm hosting a Christmas gala tomorrow evening, a charity event for the Blackwood Foundation. My sister insists on these things." Emma nodded. She'd been coordinating details for the event for weeks, confirming the guest list, arranging for the caterers, ensuring that everything would be perfect for the 200 guests who would fill the grand ballroom at the plaza. She'd even picked out the floral arrangements and approved the menu, though she'd never expected to attend. "I need you there," Alexander continued, his tone matter-of-fact. "My date canceled, and I won't attend alone. It would cause speculation, rumors about the company's stability. People read into these things." Emma blinked. Of all the things she'd expected him to say, that wasn't it. "You want me to be your date?" "I need you to accompany me to a business function," he corrected, as if there was a meaningful difference. "You're familiar with the guest list, the foundation's talking points, and you're professional enough to handle the evening with grace. I'll have a car pick you up at 6. Formal attire." Before Emma could respond, before she could point out that she didn't own anything appropriate for a gala at the plaza, he was already turning back toward his office. "Mr. Blackwood." "It's not a request, Miss Chen. I'll see you tomorrow at 6". The door to his office closed with a soft click, and Emma was left staring at the dark wood, her mind racing. She looked down at her simple black slacks and cream blouse, then at the tote bag under her desk that held her worn winter coat and sensible flats. a gala at the plaza, with Alexander Blackwood as his date, or rather, his professional companion for the evening. She must have been insane, because even as her practical mind screamed about the impossibility of it all, a small, traitorous part of her heart whispered, yes. The next morning, Emma did something she'd never done before. She called her friend Rachel at 8 in the morning in a complete panic. "I have nothing to wear," Emma said without preamble when Rachel answered the phone with a sleepy grunt. "I need a gown. For tonight. For a gala at the plaza." There was a moment of silence. Then Rachel's voice came through, suddenly wide awake. "Emma-chan, are you telling me you have a date?" "It's not a date. It's a work function. My boss needs someone to accompany him, and his actual date canceled. Your impossibly hot, incredibly rich, emotionally unavailable boss who you've been half in love with for over a year." "I'm not," Emma started, then stopped. There was no point in lying to Rachel. "Fine. Yes, that boss. But it's not what you think. It's just business." Rachel laughed. "Honey, when a billionaire invites you to a Christmas gala, it's never just business. Meet me at Saks in an hour. We're going shopping." By noon, Emma was the owner of a stunning gown that had cost more than a month's rent. It was a deep emerald green, with delicate beading along the bodice that caught the light like scattered stars. The fabric hugged her curves before flowing into an elegant A-line skirt that brushed the floor. Rachel had also insisted on shoes, strappy silver heels that made Emma feel like she was walking on stilts, and a small clutch that was purely decorative. "You look like a princess," Rachel had declared in the dressing room, tears actually forming in her eyes. He's going to die when he sees you." "He's not going to die. He's going to nod once, tell me I'm acceptable, and spend the entire evening talking business with his associates while I stand there trying not to trip in these ridiculous shoes." But as Emma stood in front of her bathroom mirror that evening, hair swept up in an elegant twist, makeup applied with more care than she usually bothered with, she had to admit that she looked different. Not like the efficient, invisible assistant who kept Alexander Blackwood's life running smoothly. She looked like someone who belonged at a gala, someone worthy of walking into a room on the arm of one of New York's most powerful men. The intercom buzzed at exactly 6 o'clock. Emma grabbed her coat, the clutch, and her courage, and headed downstairs. The car was a sleek black Mercedes, and the driver held the door open for her with a professional smile. As she slid into the leather seat, she realized she wasn't alone. Alexander sat in the far corner, his attention on his phone, his profile sharp and perfect in the dim light of the car's interior. He looked up as the car pulled away from the curb, and Emma watched his eyes widen slightly, the most visible reaction she'd ever seen from him. His gaze traveled from her face down to her gown and back up again, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. "You look," he started, then stopped, his jaw tightening. "Acceptable." Emma felt disappointment settle in her chest, but she pushed it away. What had she expected? A compliment? A confession that she took his breath away? This was Alexander Blackwood. He didn't do emotions. "Thank you, Mr. Blackwood." "Alexander," he said, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. "For tonight, at least, call me Alexander." The plaza was transformed into a winter wonderland. White lights were draped everywhere, and a massive Christmas tree dominated the center of the ballroom, decorated in gold and silver. Women in glittering gowns moved through the crowd like exotic birds, and men in tuxedos discussed business deals over champagne that probably cost more than Emma's car. Alexander's hand settled at the small of her back as they entered, and Emma felt the warmth of his touch through the thin fabric of her gown. He guided her through the crowd with practiced ease, stopping to greet guests, introducing Emma as his associate with the same cool professionalism he brought to everything. But something was different tonight. His hand never left her back, his attention never strayed far from her, and when someone would monopolize his time, his eyes would find her across the room, checking, assessing, making sure she was all right. Emma found herself relaxing into the role, smiling at the right times, making small talk about the foundation's work, even laughing at an older gentleman's terrible joke about reindeer. She was good at this, she realized. She'd spent so long observing Alexander's world from the outside that stepping into it felt almost natural. "You're a natural," a woman's voice said beside her, and Emma turned to find a striking blonde in a red gown studying her with interest. "I'm Sophia Blackwood, Alexander's sister. You must be the famous Miss Chun he's always talking about." Emma felt her eyebrows rise. "He talks about me." Sophia's smile was warm and genuine. "Constantly." Miss Chun handled the merger details. Miss Chen organized the entire conference in 3 days. Miss Chan is the only person in the office who can actually do their job properly. You're practically a legend in our family. "I'm just doing my job," Emma said, uncomfortable with the praise. "No," Sophia said, her eyes drifting across the room to where Alexander stood talking to a group of investors. "You're doing much more than that. You're the first person my brother has brought to one of these events in 3 years. The first person he's looked at like." She trailed off, then shook her head. "Well, just be patient with him. He's forgotten how to be human." Before Emma could ask what she meant, Sophia was gone, swept away by a handsome man who was clearly her husband. Emma stood alone for a moment, processing the conversation, when Alexander appeared at her elbow. "Dance with me," he said, and it wasn't quite a command but wasn't quite a request either. The orchestra was playing something soft and classical, and the dance floor was already filled with couples swaying in the dim light. Alexander led her to the center, one hand settling at her waist, the other capturing her fingers in a gentle grip. Emma's free hand came to rest on his shoulder, and suddenly they were moving, gliding across the floor with surprising synchronicity. "You dance well," Emma said, needing to fill the silence. "My mother insisted," Alexander replied, his eyes fixed on her face. "She believed that a gentleman should know how to dance, among other things." "You don't talk about your family much." His expression hardened slightly. "There's not much to say. My father nearly destroyed everything my grandfather built. My mother died when I was young. Sophia is the only family I have left that matters." Emma wanted to say something comforting, but she sensed he wouldn't welcome it. Instead, she asked, "Why did you really invite me tonight?" Alexander was quiet for so long that Emma thought he might not answer. Then, so softly she almost missed it, he said, "Because I couldn't stand the thought of you spending Christmas alone." Her breath caught. "You hardly know anything about me. I know that you take your coffee black with 1 sugar. I know that you stay late to finish work that others leave undone. I know that you volunteer at the Children's Hospital on weekends and that you send half your paycheck to your grandmother in California. I know that you love old movies and that you sing quietly when you think no one is listening. I know that you're brilliant, kind, and far too good to be wasting your time working for someone like me." Emma stared at him, her heart pounding so hard she was certain he could hear it. "I don't think I'm wasting my time." His hand tightened on her waist, drawing her infinitesimally closer. "You should have dreams bigger than being my assistant." "Maybe I do," Emma said, finding courage she didn't know she possessed. "But maybe some of those dreams involve you." The words hung between them, dangerous and honest. Alexander's eyes darkened, and for a moment, Emma thought he might kiss her right there in front of everyone. But then the song ended, and he stepped back, his expression shuddering closed again. "We should make our rounds," he said, his voice back to its professional tone. "There are several donors Sophia wanted me to speak with." The rest of the evening passed in a blur. They talked with donors, smiled for photographs, and played the perfect couple even though Emma's heart was aching with the nearness of him and the distance he maintained. By the time midnight approached, she was exhausted, her feet hurt, and she wanted nothing more than to go home and pretend this entire confusing night had never happened. Alexander drove her home himself, dismissing the driver with a curt nod. The streets of New York were quieter now, decorated with Christmas lights and dusted with a light snow that had begun to fall. Emma stared out the window, trying to memorize the beauty of the night, knowing that tomorrow everything would go back to normal. She'd be Miss Chen again, the invisible assistant, and he'd be the cold, untouchable Mr. Blackwood. When they pulled up in front of her building, Emma reached for the door handle, but Alexander's voice stopped her. "Wait!" She turned back to find him gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white. His jaw was clenched, and he was staring straight ahead as if he couldn't bear to look at her. "I've spent 3 years rebuilding my father's company," he said, his voice rough. 3 years focused on nothing but work, success, proving that I was nothing like him. I told myself I didn't have time for anything else. That relationships were a distraction I couldn't afford. That caring about someone was a weakness. Emma's breath caught, but she didn't speak, afraid that any sound would shatter whatever moment this was. "And then you walked into my office 18 months ago with your ridiculous list of qualifications and your determination to prove you deserved the job, and everything I told myself started to crack." He finally turned to look at her, and the raw emotion in his eyes made her chest ache. "You terrify me, Emma Chin, because when I'm with you, I want things I've spent years convincing myself I don't need. I want conversations that aren't about business. I want laughter and warmth and all the messy, complicated things that come with caring about someone. I want to be the kind of man who deserves someone like you." Emma felt tears prick her eyes. "Alexander, I'm not good at this," he continued almost desperately. "I'm cold and difficult and I work too much. I'll forget important dates and I'll probably hurt you without meaning to. But if you're willing to be patient with me, if you're willing to take a chance on someone who's forgotten how to be human," he reached out, his fingers brushing her cheek with a tenderness that made her heart stop. "Then I'd like to try. Not as your boss, not as a business arrangement, but as someone who's fallen completely and utterly in love with you." The words echoed in the car, and Emma felt something unfold in her chest. Something bright and warm and terrifying in the best possible way. "You love me?" Desperately, Alexander admitted, and the vulnerability in his voice was so at odds with the cold, arrogant man she thought she knew. "I've loved you for months. Maybe from the beginning. I've just been too much of a coward to admit it." Emma laughed, the sound watery with tears she couldn't quite hold back. "You're not a coward. You're the bravest person I know. Building a company, supporting your foundation, being vulnerable enough to tell me how you feel, that's not cowardice." "Then say yes," Alexander said, his hand cupping her face now, his thumb brushing away a tear that had escaped. "Say you'll give me a chance. Say you'll let me take you to dinner, to movies, to anywhere you want to go. Say you'll let me try to make you happy." Emma leaned into his touch, her own hand coming up to cover his. "I've been half in love with you since the day I started working for you," she confessed. "Even when you were being impossible and demanding, even when you barely looked at me, I couldn't help it. So yes, Alexander. Yes to all of it." The kiss was soft and careful, a question and an answer all at once. His lips were warm against hers, gentle in a way that contradicted everything she thought she knew about him. When they finally pulled apart, both of them breathing hard, Alexander rested his forehead against hers. "Merry Christmas, Emma," he whispered. "Merry Christmas, Alexander." They sat there in the car for a long time, the snow falling around them, the city lights reflecting off the windshield. Two people who'd been alone finding something neither had expected. Each other. The weeks that followed were a revelation. Alexander was true to his word. He tried. He took Emma to dinner at small restaurants where no one knew who he was. They went to midnight movie screenings of classic films. He showed up at her apartment with takeout and a willingness to just exist beside her without talking about work. He was awkward at first, stilted in the way of someone who'd forgotten how to relax, but slowly, gradually, the cold mask he wore began to crack. Emma got to know the real Alexander Blackwood, the man who was passionate about his foundation's work with underprivileged children because he'd grown up watching his father's greed hurt people. The man who called his sister every Sunday and listened patiently to stories about his nieces. The man who was brilliant and driven, yes, but also kind in quiet ways, generous when no one was watching, and deeply, almost painfully loyal to the people he cared about. They kept their relationship private at first, neither quite ready to face the office gossip or the media attention that would inevitably follow. Emma continued to work as his assistant, though now their professional interactions were tinged with inside jokes and stolen glances that made the workday infinitely more interesting. Sophia figured it out within a week, cornering Emma in the office kitchen with a knowing smile. "I've never seen my brother happy before," she said simply. "Thank you for that." 3 months after the Christmas gala, Alexander called Emma into his office in the middle of the afternoon. She went, expecting another project, another crisis that needed managing. Instead, she found him standing by the window, his hands in his pockets, staring out at the city below. "I need to tell you something," he said without turning around. Emma's heart sank. This was it. He'd realized he'd made a mistake, that being with her was too complicated, that he was better off alone. "Okay. I'm stepping down as CEO," Alexander said, finally turning to face her. "Sophia is taking over. She's better at the corporate politics anyway, and she actually enjoys these things." Emma stared at him. "But this company is everything to you. You built it." "No," Alexander said, crossing the room to stand in front of her. "I rebuilt it, and I did it to prove something to myself, to prove I wasn't my father. But I've spent the last few months realizing that there are more important things than proving a point. I want to focus on the foundation, on projects that actually help people. I want time for a life outside these walls." He took her hands in his gray eyes soft. "I want time for you." "You don't have to do this for me," Emma said, even as hope bloomed in her chest. "I'm not doing it for you," Alexander replied. "I'm doing it for us. For the life I want to build with you, if you'll have me." Emma felt tears sting her eyes again. Alexander had a terrible habit of making her cry, but they were always happy tears. "Of course I'll have you. I love you, you impossible man." He kissed her then, deep and thorough, and when they finally broke apart, he was smiling, a real, genuine smile that transformed his entire face. "There's one more thing," he said, reaching into his pocket. "I know it's fast, and I know we've only been together a few months, but I've wasted enough time in my life. I don't want to waste any more." Emma watched as he pulled out a small velvet box, her heart stopping completely. "I'm not good at romantic speeches," Alexander said, dropping to one knee. "And I'll probably mess this up. But you make me want to be better, Emma. You make me want to be the kind of man who comes home for dinner, who remembers birthdays, who builds a life instead of just a company. I love you more than I thought it was possible to love anyone, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving it to you. Will you marry me?" The ring was beautiful, a simple diamond that caught the light, elegant and perfect, but Emma barely saw it, too focused on the man kneeling in front of her. This complicated, brilliant, formerly cold billionaire who'd learned how to feel again. "Yes," she said, pulling him to his feet and into her arms. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." When they told Sophia, she cried and immediately began planning an engagement party. When they told the office, there were whispers and speculation, but Emma found she didn't care. She'd spent too long being invisible, being the efficient assistant who never made waves. It was time to be seen, to be happy, to grab onto the unexpected love she'd found and hold on tight. A year later, they were married in a small ceremony at Sophia's estate in Connecticut. Emma wore a simple white dress and carried wildflowers, and Alexander cried when she walked down the aisle, actual tears that he didn't bother to hide. They exchanged vows they'd written themselves, promising to be patient with each other's flaws, to build a life full of warmth and laughter, to never forget how lucky they were to have found each other. As they danced at their reception, Emma thought back to that Christmas Eve when Alexander had asked if she had plans for the holiday. She'd been so alone then, so certain that her life would always be work and solitude. She never could have imagined this. A husband who loved her, a family that had embraced her, a future full of possibility. "What are you thinking about?" Alexander murmured against her hair as they swayed to the music. "That I'm glad your date canceled," Emma said, smiling up at him. "That I'm glad you invited me to that gala. That I'm glad I said yes." Alexander's arms tightened around her. "Best decision I ever made," he said. "Well, second best. The first was hiring you." Emma laughed, the sound full of joy. Third best, she corrected. The first was deciding to change, to be open to love. The second was hiring me. The third was inviting me to the gala. Fair enough, Alexander conceded. Though I'd argue that falling in love with you was less a decision and more an inevitability. You're rather impossible to resist, says the man who spent 18 months pretending I didn't affect him at all. I was a fool, Alexander admitted, spinning her in a slow circle. But I'm a fool in love, which I'm told is the best kind. As the music swelled and the evening light filtered through the windows, Emma leaned into her husband's embrace and thought about second chances, about cold hearts that learned to warm, about lonely people finding exactly what they needed in the most unexpected places. Life, she decided, was full of beautiful surprises. You just had to be brave enough to say yes when they arrived.